So as someone who thoroughly enjoys the Dead Space games, yes, even the third one, I like many enjoy theorizing on what-if scenarios within the Dead Space lore, and if you would like to see or watch more of this type of content, then comment a what-if scenario in the comment section below, and I may use it for the basis of the next what-if video. See, I normally watch the what-if scenarios of other channels like Star Wars Theory, but after watching these for quite some time I had received this in my recommended, and my overall feeling is, well, it was good, but it could have been a little bit better. See, the video itself explores the lore, and most Dead Space fans already know about those things. You know, the blood moons create new markers, spit them into deep space to eventually come into contact with other life forms, make them go insane, kill themselves and each other, create new necromorphs, grow a bacterial ecosystem, then slowly but surely get to a certain point where convergence can take place, molding all the necromorphs and corruption into a blood moon. Rinse and repeat until the galaxy has been wiped clean, or in this case corrupted. Not saying there is anything wrong with the video, but it left me with a lot of unanswered questions, so I thought I'd use my knowledge of the games to create an analysis of what would actually happen, in my opinion, if we had found this monster in the Gulf of Mexico in the present day and age, instead of finding it in the future. So like the Flood, the Necromorphs or the Marker's uprising has stages to complete before achieving its end goal. So let's look through these stages while I give an explanation of the steps and their overall purpose, then we'll get into what I believe would happen in the event a Marker uprising to occur in the real world. The first step would be the decline of society. By manipulating the mental weaknesses of organic life forms, the Marker can cause a certain faction to become weaker and mentally unstable. Giving the Marker more bodies from the suicides and murders, the faction would become hell-bent on destroying each other, rather than finding out why they are losing their grip on reality. The purpose of this stage would be to weaken the opposing side first, before the first strike for a more effective strike, to create more panic and chaos as to reduce the amount of resistance. Which brings us to the second step, the Outbreak. The Outbreak would consist of a small band of necromorphs spread across the country or planet, and would begin rushing the rest of the population to breed more necromorphs in hopes of reaching the desired death toll to reach convergence. The purpose for this is to provide more bodies for the Marker to reanimate, and for infectors to create more foot soldiers, which are known as slashers, to hunt down more victims or survivors. As the outbreak continues to spread, the terraforming stage would begin. The walls, floor and ceiling would begin secreting an organic material known in the games as the corruption, designed to slow prey humans or other organic life forms down, and even killing them. Spawning cysts directly from the corruption, and can even contribute to the creation of bigger necromorphs like the hive mind or the leviathan, and has the potential to block escape routes and even trap vehicles or elevators, along with ejecting bacteria into the air, and necromorphs designed to poison the air itself would start to appear, known in the games as the Wheezers in this stage. As soon as the death toll had reached its peak and enough biomass had been collected, all necromorphs would be influenced by the Marker to return back to base to begin the final stage, convergence as we all know. Once the Marker has enough necromorph biomass around itself, it will propel all that mass into the sky to create a new blood moon. So with the general description of each major stage of events that takes place within a Marker's uprising, let's get into the setting of the scenario. So what if a organization designed to protect the civilians and citizens of America like the CIA or FBI were to see abnormal levels of electromagnetic energy? Well, they would obviously try to trace it back to the source. Say the source is at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, and say that the organization sends out multiple teams to find the source, report back to what they find and give an assessment of what they actually found. The teams would do this and find that in order to get to the source they would have to either send something down there to find out what it is, or find alternative transport, as the Gulf of Mexico is 5,200 feet deep. So they would either send a extra large uncrewed underwater vehicle, or as the public calls them as robot submarines, or hop in a personal submarine to scope out the area. Whichever they would do, they would be spending a lot of time locating the pinpoint source for the electromagnetic spasms. Also, I know what you're thinking, electromagnetic pulses can shut down machinery, so why aren't the subs malfunctioning? Well, that's because water severely weakens the pulses, allowing vehicles to go through those areas unharmed. How long would it take for them to find this initial spot for the electromagnetic behavior? I would say maybe about a month, as the Gulf is quite a big place and is very deep. Deep enough to prompt the teams to gather equipment designed to carefully go down to those depths. However, they would know if they were getting closer, as they would start to feel uneasy, stressed, and tired, eventually hallucinating, perhaps even becoming slowly unhinged and ready to crack. The teams and the subs would start becoming more and more aggressive and begin attacking each other, perhaps even killing each other while rambling incoherent sentences. The teams would leave the area and mark it down for another team to pick up where they had left off. You'd think that the effects of what they felt would wear off by the time that they ended up at a hospital, but unfortunately these effects would become permanent, like a mental scar. Eventually they would get closer and closer to the source, while hearing strange noises that would twist into voices. Some of the teams would claim to see loved ones or past relatives in the corner of their eyes. Others would be experiencing hallucinations on the screens, like a breadcrumb trail, but they would eventually come face to face with a glowing obelisk, the marker. They would find a way of transporting the marker topside after gathering measurements for cranes to be brought in. With some coordination from the submarines, they would bring it to land. This process would probably take around about a couple of weeks. At this point, I would imagine the organization would want to take it somewhere discreet as to not disturb the locals or the public, so they would arrange for it to be transported to Area 51 for further study, as they may be able to use the electromagnetic capabilities for their advantage. The organization would read the report of the past 6 weeks and would take extra care of these aggressive tendencies. I'd imagine that they would put the marker on the back of a pickup truck only to have the tires burst from the pressure, because think for a second here. We don't know what the marker is actually made from. It could be some type of volcanic rock for all we know. But in Dead Space you can actually pick up the marker in Chapter 11. And the marker is so heavy that it actually pushes Isaac back while holding it. Along with in Chapter 12 we actually have to transport it with a mechanical loader while pulling it along a railing by kinesis. So that's my justification for it being so heavy it nearly crushes the pickup truck. They would probably load it into a custom truck with tank dreads to bring the marker back to Area 51, which is a 1,600 mile journey, and they would probably be driving at 30 miles per hour. It would take them 26 days to reach Area 51 at this time, give the marker enough time to begin the first stage of its violent and hostile takeover, the decline of society. See, a lot of people do forget that the marker is sentient and can calculate when it would be the opportune moment to unleash hell upon this world, or in this case, America. So necromorphs wouldn't immediately be killing people, and the marker does like to play the long game. Over the next 10 days of the journey, residents of the surrounding areas would start to feel uneasy, which would lead into stress, which would also again lead into the first state of mental illnesses to come, insomnia, where people would only get a couple hours sleep each night, which would put people on edge. Many people would be explaining to doctors and psychologists that when they tried to sleep, they keep seeing monsters and weird symbols prompting them to wake up in the middle of the night, even having some people writing or drawing what they have seen as to try and make sense of it. Doctors would prescribe medicines like sleeping pills and other medicines to try and combat the effects of the insomnia plaguing these people. However, it would prove ineffective, which would lead into public outcry and then into riots and deaths as the symptoms worsened. Halfway into the journey, the marker would start to recombinate the dead. As a society that prefers to bury our dead rather than cremate the bodies, this would prove to be our undoing. However, again, the outbreak probably wouldn't happen for quite some time. However, more and more of the surrounding areas around the marker would continue falling into madness, with only a few out of the population able to resist the effects of the marker. Apparitions would take place instead, people seeing loved ones or relatives walking around and talking to them with cryptic messages like "make us whole." People would begin hearing whispers and voices in their minds, prompting some to commit suicide and some into violent outbursts, while others would feel superly depressed. This would cause accidental deaths like traffic accidents, work accidents, and perhaps even friendly fire while hunting. The government would be telling people to stay in their homes and give instructions similar to the instructions we received from the coronavirus pandemic, telling people to isolate as to not spread whatever is spreading this malicious mental illness around, informing the public that the expert scientists are trying to make sense of what is happening to the population. However, the riots would continue, but now in every state in America, gangs wouldn't be just shooting other gang members, but civilians as well, most likely due to hallucinating, seeing necromorphs or people rushing to attack them only for them to see that it wasn't real. As the marker would be passing Las Vegas and towards Area 51 in the Nevada area, 25 days would have passed, and the first sightings of the necromorphs would begin the second stage of the marker's uprising. The Outbreak. Necromorphs would be rushing civilians, slaughtering them, with the cops and sheriffs rushing in to shoot the necromorphs in the head and the chest, only to find that that doesn't seem to work on them. The monstrous entities wouldn't take much of a loss in this instance, as due to the riots and the mental state of the population, the country would be very much divided, and would most likely fall to the necromorphs spawning in bigger and more deadly variations of these creatures. Wildlife would succumb to these undead variations, becoming reanimated by the markers. Influencing animals such as bears, wolves, birds, and insects would be fighting for Team Necromorphs, prompting people to forget about the government's advice and to flee, only to find no escape, as the radius of the marker's influence of dead tissue to be quite far, stretching over the entire country, and perhaps the world. As the convoy reaches the airbase of Area 51, most of the surrounding areas would be lost to the recombinated creatures. The surrounding states wouldn't be completely overrun at this point. Remember, this is the infancy of the outbreak, where each state there would be perhaps a total of 50 necromorphs. However, there is still more than enough to wipe out each state. States like Louisiana and South Carolina would be easy prey to the necromorphs. However, bigger states like Texas and Montana would be able to put up more of a fight, but unfortunately it would be a losing battle. This would put America into a state of pure chaos and full-out panic, people scrambling to get on planes to other parts of the world, while others would be defending themselves against the new threat. Fortunately though, this is happening in America, where thanks to gun laws, the American public could easily push back the necromorph threat. But due to no knowledge of how to defeat these monsters, most fighters would die out. However, I would imagine a few fighters to find out the secret to killing or immobilizing necromorphs, and perhaps even fashioning a flamethrower out of household equipment, or even using an actual flamethrower. This brings me back to a comment on a video I had received a while ago. How does a flamethrower dismember? Well, it doesn't slice through skin, muscle, and bone like a cutting tool, but it would burn through flesh, and perhaps even burning necromorphs would be enough to put them down. I would imagine people, upon learning about this trick, would inform others on social media and video streaming platforms like YouTube. However, with this scenario, it's not about if you can survive, but for how long you can survive for, as we all know that you have to stop shooting at some point, giving the necromorphs the upper hand. At this point, I would say about 1/5 of the population would have either died or fled on boats or planes to neighboring countries. However, as we know, that will not help you, as infectors are pretty sneaky at stowing away, allowing for them to go and infect other places outside of the US. The first stage weakened the society for a reason, so that people would be easier to kill and reanimate without much resistance. However, while the outbreak had been distracting much of the population, something foul had been spreading over the terrain that pulsates like a living being, something organic. The corruption would be spreading in several different places, as the marker makes use of every part of the body, even blood and individual cells, breaking them down, inverting them into hostile bacteria, which would aid the necromorphs into killing more and more. Which brings us to the third stage, the terraforming. As the outbreak rages on, the corruption would be oozing out of the manhole covers, infecting the very environment itself. The marker would start recombination for guardians and wheezers to infect the air we breathe, which would impair our abilities to access certain areas, to see and, of course, breathe. More and more of the population would fall to the necromorph scourge, now rising to half of the population. In a few days' time, the corruption will have covered 1/3 of the environment of America. The current population of America this year is 332,616,743 people, and counting. However, with the mid-game of the outbreak, only 166,308,371 people would still be alive, trying to desperately survive this nightmare. The government would be backed into a corner, and the president would order for the return of all American soldiers fighting in other countries to defend the mainland. However, remember people fleeing? Well, I would imagine the infectors to have survived the journey and to be infecting more and more people to bolster the necromorph ranks, so only half as much would be able to return home. However, by that time they would reach the shores of America. They probably wish they hadn't, as after a few more days the population would shrink again to 83,154,185 people. People would try and hide in lockers and other places, but as necromorphs like the swarms, they can squeeze through any tight gap. Those people would begin eaten alive within their hiding places. Necromorphs like the Leviathan and the Hive Mind would be present here, crushing buildings, killing more people, and the corruption would have spread to the 2/3 of the country. At this time, I would imagine the military to arrive to find a desolate, nightmarish version of what they imagined seeing, with flesh growing on the streets, walls, and ceilings that produced a foul, deathly smell that would cause people to throw up. Needless to say, the military being there wouldn't make much of a difference at this point, with the hive mind roaming around. Helicopters, AC-130s and battleships wouldn't be able to do much, as a hive mind would be able to easily take them down. It would be most likely by this time that Ubermorphs would start appearing, you know, the bastards that can regenerate, but thankfully the necromorphs like the Twitches can't exist in this time period because we don't have stasis, or at least implants of stasis in our bodies. The organizations responsible for this would inform the scientists at Area 51 to find out what's happening, and they would theorize, since this is happening ever since they pulled the obelisk out of the water, then maybe it has something to do with it. And over the next day, the government would be informed of this development and would order these organizations to throw the marker back to where they found it before all is lost. However, I shouldn't have to say this, but there is no point, as America has already fallen, as it would take an additional 26 days to return to the Gulf of Mexico. However, they would take all available people to take the marker back to the Gulf, but halfway back to the Gulf they would come across more corruption barring their way, and the population is very low right now, scaling at 2,598,568 people. However, over the next week that number would be snuffed out, and the transformation of the remaining corpses into either corruption or more necromorphs would be taking place over the next couple of days. At this point, the entire country would be successfully terraformed, and with the marker getting closer to the Gulf, the necromorphs would begin returning to their roots, and to the marker for the next stage in this scenario has begun: convergence. This would take about a month, maybe two, for 300 million necromorphs to retreat back to the marker, but it's quite obvious that the remaining humans in the area would be dead due to the local reanimated corpses. Now with no humans to stop them, the convergence event would begin, and shortly after, the marker would become whole, and a blood moon would be born. So as a conclusion to this what-if scenario, we would not be able to survive, as sure enough we would be able to put up, well, I wouldn't say much of a resistance, more of a struggle when the outbreak eventually hits us, due to the government's lack of intervention, quarantine protocols, and not taking the situation seriously until it would be too late. Without proper weapons designed to dismember, as you've got to think about this, sure, a chain gun or a chainsaw would be great at defeating necromorphs, but eventually you'll have to stop, eat, drink, sleep, or reload. Necromorphs do not need to do any of this. They are literal killing machines, and with the technology we are currently at, we wouldn't be able to stop a necromorph invasion or infestation. Also, before people start saying that corruption appears before the necromorphs do, that has happened in some cases, yes, and I didn't say that the corruption hadn't appeared before the outbreak. In my opinion, the time of the population going insane, developing abnormal mental behaviors and illnesses, the corruption would be redecorating the sewer systems, fleshing them out, so to speak. Thank you for watching. If you would like to see another what if scenario, then write it in the comments. It could be something to do with Dead Space or another franchise, or bringing another deadly foe or faction into the real world. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating would be appreciated, and if you're new here, then join the British Alliance today by subscribing and ringing the notification bell, and I'll see all of you on the front lines, and have a good one.